It always catches me out, doesn't it? Again, welcome to residents looking in on our streaming service and the representatives of major applicant today, and anybody else who's looking in on our endeavours. We do have a fairly small agenda, item-wise, but very important matters for the future of this town. So without further ado, can we go to declarations of interest, if any member has any? None is declared, thank you. And then item 2, is it your wish that I sign the minutes of the last meeting as a true record of our decisions? Thank you very much. That will then go into the archives. Over to Jennifer. And then would you note item 3, the usual report on enforcement action, and item 4 as well. And then if we could all turn to item 5, the major planning application for Central Beach. I think Mr. Leicester's coming in from the Pleasure Beach, and Mr. Adrian Spaywith for the applicant. Are they both with us?
They are, Chair.
Thank you very much. You can imagine that this has been a major exercise for our planning team. The work involved has been quite enormous, as you will gather from the report which is before you. Writing these things is itself a challenge, but of course it can only be written up when the department has received the reports and representations from all the consultees who are involved in a major development of this kind. And I think it speaks wonders for Susan Parker, for the way she's been able to wrestle with so many imponderables over recent weeks, and to have been able to come to us tonight with not just a report of great significance, but a slideshow as well. So it's over to Susan, please, to introduce the subject.
Thank you, Chair. I'll just share my screen so you can see the presentation. There we go. So this is the application for Blackpool Central. I do appreciate it's somewhat unusual for me to do a dedicated PowerPoint presentation, but because it is such a large and complex proposal, I thought it would be easier for me to add some visuals to my usual verbal summary. Also, you may not believe me by the time I finish, but I have tried to keep this presentation brief, but there is a lot of material to cover, so please bear with me. So as you can see, the site is roughly the land bound by New Bonny Street to the north, Bonny Street to the west, Chapel Street to the south, and Central Drive to the east. This is the actual submitted location plan, and you can see that it incorporates all of New Bonny Street, Brunswick Street, and the northern end of Seaside as Way. Just before I move on to the application itself, I'd like to give a brief explanation of EIA development. We start to think about the EIA regulations and submission of environmental statements for the larger schemes that have potential to have a significant environmental impact. And usually there are 3 stages. Firstly, the applicant can ask for a screening opinion to basically ask if the council thinks an environmental statement is required. In this case, the applicant skipped this stage because it was obviously a necessity. The second stage is to ask for a scoping opinion, and this is where the council gets to advise the applicant on what it considers the key issues to be, and essentially what we want the environmental statement to look at, how, over what area, and in what level of detail. Finally, you have the submission of the environmental statement itself, and as shown on the screen, it has 2 parts. Part 1 is the overview, and Part 2 includes the detailed chapters on each topic. An environmental statement must consider alternative options and cumulative impact. It must take into account the magnitude of an impact, its likelihood, the sensitivity of the receptors, and the overall level of confidence that can be applied. Mitigation measures are taken into account, and what's called a residual effect is identified. And in accordance with the precautionary principle, the environmental statement must consider the worst case scenario. In this case, and whilst inevitably for a document of this length and complexity, a few issues have been identified, overall the findings of the submitted environmental statement are accepted. So what is the application for? It's a hybrid application. Committee has seen a few of these in the last year or two, and this means it's a combination of outline and full or detailed applications. The full element of the application relates to the erection of a 7-level multi-storey car park and the conversion of what we're calling the Heritage Quarter buildings, which are the King Edward pub, former cinema and apartment block. The picture house would become an artisan food hall. The pub and the apartment block would become apart hotels with a mix of retail and food and beverage uses at ground floor level. And the area to the rear would be an outdoor seating space with some servicing and so on. The car park is what is being called the enabling phase, and the Heritage Quarter works are phase 2. And the outline element has been roughly split in half, with the northern section being phase 1, as you can see outlined in purple, and the southern section where the courts complex is being phase 3, and that's outlined in blue. Phase 1 would include the main indoor theme park with the flying theatre and adventure park. It would also provide a hotel and a retail or food and beverage unit in the northeastern corner. Phase 3 would see the extension of the first theme park building and the provision of 2 more. One would include additional car parking and one a new coach station. Once the courts complex is gone, a new link road from Seasiders Way to Chapel Street would be provided as part of Phase 3. We've had 9 representations submitted in response to the application, and these are detailed in the officer report and in the update note. I do appreciate that the officer's report has been quite a lengthy document for you to all wade through, so I don't want to go through all of the aspects of it now, or we'd be here all night, so I'm going to focus on the key issues. The scheme is mixed use, but the main goal is to provide a new leisure attraction. Whilst a whole host of policies are relevant, CS20 of the core strategy is perhaps most so as it relates specifically to this site. I know you are, of course, all familiar with our policies and the development plan, but you have been given a copy of CS20 for convenience, and you should all have that. The policy essentially seeks redevelopment of the site to provide major leisure development of national significance, something that will provide a compelling new reason to visit Blackpool and that would complement rather than undermine the existing resort offer. So the key issues are therefore whether the proposal is new, whether it would be significant enough to deliver the regeneration ambitions of the policy, and the impact it would have on existing attractions. Members will note that the Pleasure Beach considers the proposals to be contrary to policy CS20 and have objected to the application on that basis. Their comments are detailed in the officer report and update note. So will it be new? The application is for 3 indoor theme park buildings, one of which would include a flying theatre and an adventure park. We cannot change the wording of the description of the development without starting the application process over again, and so the application must be determined as submitted or the decision would be unlawful. The council could not reasonably impose a condition preventing theme park use. Whilst there is no planning definition of a theme park, general industry understanding suggests that it is not materially different to an amusement park, and the Pleasure Beach is an amusement park. Members must therefore consider the extent to which the proposal is new. The Flying Theatre is definitely a new attraction for Blackpool. The theme parks would be entirely indoor and would therefore be a year-round attraction. The statement of intent submitted by the applicant identifies provision of virtual reality and multimedia elements, and Condition 5, as proposed, would require the development to proceed in broad accordance with the theme of ancient discoveries, aliens, adventure and mystery set out in that document. A unified theme across all aspects of the leisure offer within the indoor theme parks would create an attraction of scale. Will it be national in scale? Perhaps not, and that is admittedly a very ambitious ask for a site of this size, but it would add to the existing offer of the resort and support Blackpool as a resort, a national destination. There is significant commentary in the report about visitor numbers, and I don't intend to revisit that now, other than to say that it is extremely difficult to predict how many visitors would come to Blackpool Central. We are talking about a fairly unique proposal in what is certainly a unique location. Reasonable comparatives are few and far between, and so you have to layer assumptions on assumptions, and each time you do that you introduce a new range of uncertainty. So what we can say with some confidence is that a significant number of people would visit. Some of these visitors may well be drawn away from other attractions, but this would happen with any development on the site, as tourists do not have the time and money to do everything. And the impact would be spread across the resort. It may be that the enhanced offer encourages visitors to stay longer, and in doing so visit more attractions. Pleasure Beach one day, Blackpool Central the other, for example. New and exciting development on a site as central as this certainly has the potential to act as a catalyst for further investment. So members must consider the extent to which they feel the scheme complies with policy CS20. However, the proposal does not have to be entirely compliant in order for a planning permission to be granted. If there is conflict with CS20, members must consider if the proposal accords with the aims and objectives of the development plan as a whole. If there is conflict with the development plan, members must consider whether or not there are other material planning considerations, such as new jobs or economic output, that would nevertheless justify an approval. This is the application of what we call the planning balance. Turning to the hotel accommodation, the key requirement set out in the Leisure Quarter SPD is that this provision on site must meet no more than 60% of the demand generated, and this is to help spread the benefits of the scheme. The scheme proposes a standard hotel and an apart hotel accommodation within the Heritage Quarter. The quality can be controlled through condition on the full element and through reserve matters on the outline. In terms of quantity, as per the slide, this is another area where the officer report sets out lots of numbers representing different scenarios that I won't repeat now. Suffice to say that to work out if the proposal meets policy, we need to know how many visitors there will be, how many will stay overnight, the predicted occupancy rate in terms of number of rooms that are utilised, and the likely occupancy rate in terms of the number of people per room. There are comparators available, but members will appreciate this is another scenario where assumptions are laid upon assumptions, and each time this introduces a wider range of uncertainty at each level. We also have to consider the amount of accommodation that will be provided at each stage and what leisure offer would be available at that stage to take up the accommodation. Using the numbers in the report, the scheme would have to generate a proportion of overnight stays greater than the Blackpool average in order to meet policy. Only once all three elements of the different phases are delivered and operational would policy be met without the need for uplift, and at this point the aspirations of the SPD would, it's predicted, be exceeded. As per the officer report, what can be said with some confidence is that the scheme would generate some demand for overnight stays that could not be met on site. This surplus demand could then be met by the existing holiday accommodation provision off-site in the wider resort, and this would spread the benefits of the scheme. So again, members must consider the extent to which the proposal would comply with the SPD and balance this against the compliance with the overall development plan and all relevant material planning considerations. Moving on to the main town centre uses, as you can see from the slide, the site falls within the town centre boundary, which is red, but outside of the principal retail core, which I've outlined in green. And this is what we consider to be the primary shopping area under a different name which purely reflects the age of the local plan. The MPPF tells us that proposals for main town centre uses that aren't in a centre must pass the sequential and impact tests. No sequential appraisal or impact assessment has been submitted. However, the primary concern is to protect the health of the town centre and Central Drive local centre. There is a significant amount of retail floor space on the site, and so the overall quantum would actually reduce. The retail provision within the theme parks would be ancillary to those theme parks, and we would secure that through condition. The building in the northeast corner is considered to be ancillary to the site as a whole, as it would incorporate the architectural wayfinding feature and would also provide an active link between the site and the town centre. the type of provision on site is likely to be very different to that in the Central Drive local centre, which principally exists to meet the walk-in, day-to-day needs of local residents. And so on this basis and on balance, the retail provision proposed on site is considered to be acceptable. I'm going to depart from the order of my report somewhat and talk about parking and highway matters. How much parking demand will the development generate? I'm starting to sound like a broken record, but again, it's very difficult to say with certainty. We have adopted standards in the local plan and emerging standards in Part 2, but they make no allowance for any linked trips between the different elements of the scheme, and these linkages could be quite significant. The applicant has sought to use TRIX data to predict parking demand, and that's an industry standard. But again, truly comparable schemes are few and far between. In addition, it's not reasonable to expect parking provision to meet maximum or peak demand, because this would result in a car park that is partly empty a lot of the time, and that wouldn't be an efficient use of land. And we also have to consider the aspirations of the SPD to increase modal share by coach travel, which will thereby reduce parking demand. And finally, we have to add into the mix that elements of the scheme generating parking demand would be delivered at different times, as would the two elements of parking provision. So again, we end up with a range of likely parking demand, and that range is quite broad. We are potentially looking at a situation whereby parking provision will be insufficient to meet demand in the medium term until phase 3 is delivered. Long term, the scheme would appear to be met only at the bottom end of the predicted demand range. The issue of car parking provision has been discussed at length with the Head of Highways and Traffic Management Services. And on balance, given the level of uncertainty and the wider plans to improve car parking through the town centre parking strategy, officers consider the level proposed to be acceptable. With regard to coach parking, whilst none is proposed on site, it is considered that expansion of the existing resort facilities on Central Corridor would meet the demands of the development. So staying on the subject of transport, the commencement of work on the multi-storey would sever the existing vehicle and pedestrian connection from Seasiders Way into the site. And this will affect tourists trying to access the site itself to park and motorists who use it as a cut-through from the motorway to access other destinations. Short term, all traffic will have to be taken off Seasiders Way to the south of Chapel Street, and this is likely to be at Waterloo Road, Bloomfield Road and or Lonsdale Road, where I've indicated with the orange arrows. Medium term, once the multi-storey is built, only motorists that currently pass through the site will then require diversion. And long term, a new link road from Seasiders Way onto Chapel Street is proposed as part of phase 3, and that's the image that you can see at the bottom. However, and as with any development, there is a chance that phase 3 and the new link road will not materialise. And so we have to ensure that the mitigation measures put in place to solve the severance issue now would do that job in that eventuality. The diversion routes and the need for associated signage, signal changes and so on can only be designed once existing traffic flows are known. And COVID prevented the necessary survey work from being done prior to submission. But the Department for Transport has now announced that road conditions are back to normal and this survey work has been carried out. Officers are entirely confident that appropriate mitigation in terms of diversion routes can be agreed to overcome the severance issue. And as such, it's recommended that this matter be resolved now through condition rather than delaying determination to reach detailed design at this point. Pedestrian movement would also be affected. Short term, the existing surface car park, which is in phase 1 to the north of the site, that would continue to be used as the existing coach station. And so whilst coaches would have to be diverted to reach that area, it would not particularly affect passengers alighting. However, when the work commences on phase 1, the existing coach station would be lost, and it's envisaged that a temporary one would be created on Central Corridor until the station proposed as part of phase 3 is delivered. This will mean that pedestrians alighting onto Seasiders Way would have to find a route north into the town centre and to resort attractions. It's essential that safe and attractive pedestrian routes through to the town centre are created, and members will note the inclusion of conditions to this effect, including a requirement that these routes be bound by engaging hoardings to make the walk as pleasant as possible. Longer term, it is envisaged that the streets immediately around the northern end of the site would be given more pedestrian priority to better connect to the town centre and resort core, and this would require a range of highway improvement works and alterations in the areas surrounding the site, and I've broadly outlined that in blue. Again, this can be secured through condition. So, we have a complex shopping list of highway issues and improvements to be provided, but it's one that officers are confident that can be managed through condition without undue impact on the road network. Before I move on to issues of design and heritage impact, I just want to make reference to the other matters that have been considered through the report. I don't feel that I need to cover them in detail here, as all of the information is in the officer report. Members will note the updated comments from Her Majesty's Courts and Tribunals Service in the update note. On the subject of ecology, a Stage 1 Habitats Regulations assessment has been submitted and has found no likelihood of significant impact on the conservation values of nearby protected sites, subject to the imposition of conditions recommended. Members are therefore respectfully recommended to adopt the HRA on behalf of the Council as competent authority before making a decision in respect of the application. Otherwise, the issues listed must all be weighed in the planning balance, and this is what I've sought to do in section 11.12 of the report. Of course, the committee is at liberty to reach its own conclusions in terms of the degree of acceptability and weight to be attached to each. The site is clearly in a sensitive visual location. It falls within the setting of statutorily and locally listed buildings and 2 conservation areas. It includes development to a statutorily listed building, which will be discussed later. The main approach into the site provides a strategic view of our iconic Blackpool Tower and will be the first experience of the tower for many visitors. Throughout the application process, the architects have recognised the importance of preserving this key view and have designed the layout of the site around it. Building heights have equally been limited to ensure that the settings of key assets are protected. Although detailed design is to be left to reserve matters stage, the visuals submitted indicate an intention to create an exciting and engaging arrival point for visitors, and this would be enhanced by lighting and public realm design. A Townscape visual impact assessment has been submitted as part of the environmental statement, and this considers impacts on views agreed at pre-app stage, and the findings of this document are agreed. As set out in the officer report, overall the scale and indicative layout of the development is considered to be acceptable in visual terms in this context. Details of the proposed multi-storey car park and heritage quarter have been submitted as part of the full element to the scheme. The car park in particular was always going to present a design challenge because of its scale, nature and function. The materials proposed are considered to be suitable, and it is recognised that the effective use of lighting could enhance the overall appearance during hours of low light or darkness. The use of perforation would be an interesting way to create visual interest, and the diagonal design would reference the form of the tower. Nevertheless, the solution proposed perhaps does not reflect the highest design quality and creative architecture sought by policy, and this must be weighed in the planning balance. The works proposed for the heritage quarter, however, would significantly improve the appearance of these buildings and have a clear positive impact on the quality of the street scene. The extension to the apartment building, though substantial, would be sympathetic and would read well with the existing frontage. Looking specifically at the potential heritage impact, Section 66 of the Planning, Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act 1990, the Listed Buildings Act, states that when considering whether to grant planning permission or not for development which affects a listed building or its setting, the decision maker must have special regard to the desirability of preserving the building or its setting or any features of special architectural or historic interest which it possesses. The NPPF expands upon this principle. Paragraph 200 requires any harm to or loss of a designated asset to be clearly and convincingly justified. Paragraph 201 explains how proposals causing substantial harm should be approached. Paragraph 202 makes it clear that where a proposal would lead to less than substantial harm, the harm must be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal, including, where appropriate, securing its optimum viable use. The courts have confirmed that decision makers should give considerable importance and weight to the desirability of preserving the setting of listed buildings when carrying out their planning balance exercise. The proposals have been considered by Historic England, the Council's Built Heritage Manager, the Blackpool Civic Trust and Lancashire County Council Archaeology Service. No objections are raised and no substantial harm to any asset is anticipated. Suitable conditions are proposed to protect and enhance the heritage assets. And overall, the works to restore the buildings, particularly the former picture house, back to more closely its original form, are very much welcomed. The final points I want to cover relate to the anticipated benefits of the scheme and take me back to the issue of planning balance. Planning law stipulates that the starting point for the determination of applications is the development plan. However, the decision maker must give due regard to all material planning considerations and weigh the planning balance. The amount of weight to be attached to each planning consideration is for the decision maker to determine, but at all times the decision maker must act reasonably. The decision must therefore reflect the reasonable judgment of a reasonable person acting reasonably, and I know that as members of the Planning Committee you are already all well aware of this. In reaching your conclusion, you must balance any conflict with planning policy or the development plan against any benefits that the scheme would deliver. These benefits include job creation. It is anticipated that the scheme would create up to 28 new jobs during construction and up to 474 once fully operational. There would be a corresponding improvement in skills and training delivery. The year-round nature of the attraction would also provide more job security and lessen the marked seasonality that the sector currently suffers from. Economic output is predicted to increase by 4.5 million during construction and 27.4 million once the scheme is fully operational. It is reasonable to assume that the kind of high-quality development proposed could improve perceptions of the resort and attract a new demographic of visitors to the resort and thereby expand our market to the wider benefit of the sector. It is also reasonable to assume that redevelopment of this scale on such a key central site could act as a catalyst for further investment, growth and regeneration. Given the central role that tourism plays in the Blackpool economy and the very high levels of deprivation that the town suffers from, I would suggest that these considerations could be afforded significant weight. One final thing for me, I think it is worth pointing out that the Council is essentially wearing two hats in respect of this application. On the one hand, the Council is the local planning authority tasked with determining this application, but on the other it is landowner and is therefore party to the land sale agreement in respect of the site. Members may be aware of matters covered by that agreement or conditions relating to the land sale. I must stress that the land deal is entirely separate from the planning process and members must disregard it when making a decision in respect of this application. And in saying this, I do acknowledge, and I only noticed this afternoon when putting this presentation together, that section 13 of my report makes no reference of the fact that the Council stands to benefit financially and to a significant extent from the sale of the land. This is a clear oversight for which I can only apologise, but I will say that I think I overlooked the point because it carries absolutely no weight in the planning balance. It is not a consideration for us as planning decision makers, and I must stress that to you. So, in light of all this, the officer recommendation is as stated in the report. Members are respectfully recommended to adopt the HRA on behalf of the Council as the competent authority and grant planning permission subject to the conditions listed at Appendix D to the update note. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed, Susan, for that introduction. There is, as you say, an awful lot to digest, and we've not had an awful lot of time since the report was issued to do so. But I think we've all been well aware that a decision had to be made very shortly on this prospective development, and I think we've all been eagerly waiting for this agenda item to come along. And I'm sure Susan's been glad to see the back of it in many ways. It's on the outline, of course, and she's got an awful lot more work to do in the not too distant future. I'm going to ask now if Mr. Nick Laister would like to address the committee. In introducing him, I must say how disappointed I was that the Deputy Managing Director of Blackpool Pleasure Beach saw fit to send his letter of last Friday to individual members of the committee without having the usual courtesy of handing a similar copy to our department. And of course it's meant that our planners have had to react fairly quickly over the weekend, and they would only have known about it if I hadn't put it in. So I think he ought to be aware of that for the future. I hope that doesn't lead to any misunderstandings, but I think it would be helpful all round if major objectors of this, against an application of this sort would go through the usual decencies and let everybody concerned at the Town Hall be aware of those representations. So, Mr. Laister, would you like to come in, please?
Yes, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me okay. I'm Nick Laister from Laister Planning Limited, and I'm speaking on behalf of the Pleasure Beach. We wrote to Blackpool Council formally with our objections to the application on the 8th of July, and our objection related to our fears that as more details of the development have become known over recent months, it seemed that a unique and distinctive leisure development was becoming just an indoor theme park or amusement park. We therefore objected to the description of development as a theme park, and we also proposed some suggestions on how to deal with these issues. But I do want to make it clear from the outset that Blackpool Pleasure Beach strongly supports the redevelopment of the Blackpool Central site. It has been vacant for too long, and its redevelopment has the potential to provide a distinctive new attraction, providing new reasons for visiting the town. This will be beneficial to all leisure and hospitality businesses. However, we have grave concerns about the way the content of the development has changed over recent months. On the 10th of December 2018, the executive agreed to adopt a master plan for Blackpool Central as presented by the developers. In February 2019, the executive agreed the land sale and investment into the project. The content of the project was genuinely new and unique and was absolutely not a theme park, nor was that term used at any point in those discussions to the best of our knowledge. By the time of the planning application, this had been watered down to indoor theme parks, primarily based around white knuckle and family rides with little detail given. The core strategy policy CS20 for the leisure quarter states that Blackpool Central development must provide a compelling new reason to visit Blackpool and must integrate with and support whilst not undermining existing resort core uses and attractions. It is clear that this development should not be replicating what is already available in Blackpool. The development that's proposed is a theme park. The Oxford English Dictionary defines theme park as an amusement park with a unifying setting or idea. It's a simple fact that in the UK, every attraction that is branded a theme park is an amusement park. There isn't a single theme park that I'm aware of in this country that is not based around mechanical rides. As a specialist in this sector, I advise a large number of theme parks nationally, and most councils in the UK consider a theme park to be an amusement park for the purposes of planning. This is demonstrated by the fact that all councils I'm aware of allow theme parks to take advantage of permitted development rights that are only available to amusement parks, which is defined in planning. So in planning terms, they are one and the same. And if you were to ask the ordinary person in the street, as it were, what is a theme park, I think they would say Blackpool Pleasure Beach, Alton Towers, Chessington World of Adventures. So in non-planning terms, they are also one and the same. You therefore need to be aware that you are being asked to approve another theme park in Blackpool, which will directly undermine Blackpool Pleasure Beach, which is a major resort core attraction. This is quite clearly contrary to your core strategy. A development that we once supported is now seen as a serious threat to the Pleasure Beach's existence. In our letter of the 8th of July, we suggested that the chosen description of the main buildings as indoor theme parks was unfortunate and really should be amended, especially if the development is not going to be a theme park. We also suggested a condition that would ensure that the development does not become another theme amusement park and undermining existing resort core attractions. The condition would prevent more than, we suggested, 10% of the floor space being used for mechanical rides. Such a condition would ensure that the mechanical rides element of the development remains ancillary to the overall development and doesn't become a dominant feature. I'm sure the council would agree that if it did become a dominant, this would have serious consequences for the Pleasure Beach and potentially for other rides-based attractions in the resort core. Whilst Florida and Dubai are able to host multiple theme parks in one town, none happily coexist in the UK in the same town. Now, last week, we wrote to all members expressing our concern about the content of the development. The Supplementary Committee update note posted on the Council's website responds to that letter. In this update note, the Council withdrew the proposed Condition 5 and replaced it with a condition that simply requires the leisure elements of the development to be in broad accordance with the Statement of Intent that was submitted back in September. This condition does not in any way resolve our concerns, as the statement of intent states that the branded indoor theme parks will be a mix of rides, games, experiences and shows in a themed environment. We can be very clear about this. If the council approves a theme park, i.e. an amusement park with theming, the conditions proposed will not prevent the developer from operating most, if not all, of the building as an amusement park if they wish to do so. This is not what is being sought by policy. The council may well try to prevent this through the process of discharging conditions or at the reserved matters stage, but if the planning permission is for an unrestricted theme park, which is exactly what it is at the present time, the council would not be able to defend this on appeal. Inspectors will consider it unreasonable to grant permission for a theme park and then not permit theme park rides to be installed. The council will lose control. Indeed, our fears have been confirmed in the update note. In this note, the council states about our suggestion of restricting mechanical rides that it would introduce an unreasonable restriction given the description of development. That's exactly the point that we were making in our objections. Because the development is called theme park, it would not be possible to prevent the inclusion of theme park rides, which would undermine resort core attractions in direct contradiction of policy CS20. The council appears to be freely admitting that it cannot prevent a theme park from having theme park rides. This is a significant change in position since last week, and one that we ask the committee to please address. This brings us right back to the position as set out in our objections. If the development is not to be a theme park with rides, and our understanding from presentations given by the developer is that that is not the intention, then the description of development should be changed to something that does not put the council in a difficult position. Theme and amusement parks have an expectation of mechanical rides. We suggest calling the development
1 minute remaining.
an indoor entertainment centre or indoor themed attraction. Such a name would not automatically imply theme park rides based attraction. It would then allow the council to safely impose a condition such as the one we have proposed and ensure that the condition meets the tests for planning conditions. If the council and or the developer is not willing to amend the description of development, then we are left with the undesirable situation that the council has now acknowledged, that any condition imposed to restrict the proportion of the development used for mechanical rides may well be challenged by the developer on the basis that it has been given planning permission for a theme park, so it is unreasonable to restrict the implementation of rides. Nonetheless, on balance, this is something that Blackpool Pleasure Beach considers can be imposed, and it would meet the tests for conditions, as the conditions can be tied to the requirements of policy CS20. This can only be done at the outline stage. It will not be possible to retrospectively achieve this at the reserved matters or condition discharge stage. It's important that you understand this. So finally, I would say we're not asking for any other aspect of the development to be amended. So there's no reason why the changes we have requested should significantly delay the issuing of a decision. I do disagree with what your officer said earlier about going back to the start. That changing those two words would not require going back to the beginning again. There would just need to be a short reconsultation and an update to the EIA. We therefore respectively ask that members instruct officers to work with the developer to amend the description of development and to impose a condition preventing a mechanical rides-based amusement park being developed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Laister. We've listened to your remarks with great interest. I'm surprised that the Pleasure Beach looks upon this development with such trepidation. Blackpool exists because it's a multiplicity of amusement appeal. The Pleasure Beach will always be one of the great dynamos of Blackpool, together with the Tower. But it survives because people come to Blackpool and they want to enjoy all kinds of amenities. And this at Central Beach, according to the applicant, is going to be one of many attractions of great value and significance. But I'm now going to ask the applicant's agent, Mr. Spofford, if he would like to speak to the committee.
My name is Adrian Sporforth. I'm Managing Director of Sporforths, and we are Nick Al's planners, master planners and joint architects for the project. It might be useful if I address the Pleasure Beach comments first before I go on and touch on the wider scheme. The aim of the Blackpool Central project is to help Blackpool provide a more diverse leisure offer in order to attract more people from more places and to get those people to stay in the town for longer. The proposals therefore are designed to be a very different offer from, say, the Pleasure Beach or Two Swords or the Tower and our overarching aim is to enrich the overall visitor experience. In short, Nickel have no interest in building a small indoor version of the pleasure beach. We've been unable to find any reasonable basis supported by any form of evidence to conclude that our proposals cannot happily coexist with all the other fantastic attractions that the town has to offer. And for this reason, we support the planning condition that the council are proposing in order to address the pleasure beach's concerns. And this condition will ensure that the content of the proposed developments are something you as a council can control at both reserved matters stage, which we believe is actually the best stage to address these issues, and secondly, by the enforcement of the proposed planning condition. At its heart, what is being proposed is a £300 million mixed-use regeneration project that is not underpinned by retail, and this is still very unusual. What we're about to create for Blackpool are safe, high-quality spaces and buildings within which some incredible experiences are going to occur. In order to allow these experiences to happen, we're proposing some very large indoor spaces that will be open 364 days a year and that will provide shelter and warmth in the winter and that will be no less appealing in the spring and summer. We're also going to be building some large car-free outdoor spaces where concerts, markets and other events can happen with a degree of shelter from the seafront. And last and definitely not least, we're going to bring the listed King Edward Picture House and the apartments back into on the council's ambitious regeneration plans for this part of the town. Blackpool Central is therefore intended to complement and enhance what the town already has to offer, to form a destination in its own right, and to form a logical and natural extension to both the town centre and to the Golden Mile. Developments that are seeking to truly address our climate emergency are those built in the most sustainable locations, which makes Blackpool Central, a previously developed site on the edge of the town centre, absolutely ideal. To minimise our environmental impact, we're proposing the reuse of as many of the existing historic buildings as we can, to create flexible leisure buildings that are adaptable over time so that what we don't have is to demolish them when an attraction becomes obsolete. We're creating buildings with long life expectancies, with low embodied carbon, and we're creating buildings with no less than BREEAM very good. And to give you the confidence that these are not empty words, the planning conditions that Blackpool Council are proposing will ensure that the necessary environmental standards are not just promised, but are also delivered. The meaningful transition to electric and hybrid vehicles has finally started. And although the technology is still evolving, this is at a rapidly increasing rate. Our plan is therefore to future-proof the proposed multi-storey car park and equip it with all the electrical infrastructure we will need in the years to come, but not to overinvest in the current technology at this stage that may then become obsolete before it is ever fully utilised. This approach will then allow the most up-to-date charging technology to be installed in the car park as each of our phases of development are delivered. We've also sought to prioritise walking and cycling over the car so that when visitors arrive at Blackpool Central, they can park their cars in a safe and secure car park and then leave it there until they depart at the end of the visit. This is why the public realm is so important to our scheme, and the creation of safe, overlooked, well-lit, car-free spaces is at the heart of our proposals. There's some very important neighbours and stakeholders that will be affected by our scheme, especially during the construction stages, and we've engaged with them and listened to their issues and concerns. We've undertaken an environmental assessment that concluded that there are very few adverse impacts arising from the scheme, and those impacts that do arise are all capable of being successfully mitigated by the proposed planning conditions. Almost 700 people have responded to our engagement, with around 90% expressing support for the scheme. We've engaged with the Majesty's Courts and Tribunal Service to minimise any adverse impacts on their activities, and there are a series of planning conditions to address their concerns and ensure that there is meaningful dialogue with them during the construction period. We do recognise that there may still be concerns that the scheme could adversely impact on existing businesses. However, the assessments that have been commissioned show multiple benefits arising from the proposals, and these include an estimated 600,000 additional visitors to the town a year, 40% of the guest bedrooms that are being generated by the scheme be provided elsewhere in the town, not on our site, a financial boost in spending in the town of around 75 million a year, and up to 1,000 new jobs being created as directly from the development and elsewhere in the town. It's taken nearly 4 years since the first discussion started between Nickel and Blackpool Council. The land deal was signed in January 2020, and then just 2 months later, we unfortunately went into a national lockdown. However, despite those challenges of working through COVID, we've managed to submit an application in less than 18 months. And Blackpool's officers, facing huge challenges during the pandemic, have managed to get the proposals to this committee in just over 16 weeks. And that's an incredible achievement and a credit to all those who have given up their evenings and weekends to get it to this point. It's not gone unnoticed, and we offer our thanks to everybody who has been involved to get it here tonight. I would therefore like to finish with a point that is made very succinctly by the case officer who has been dealing with the application, and which is in the committee reports in front of you tonight. And I quote from that report because I think it's a really good quotation. She said, "The council has spent over 20 years attempting to attract investment, facilitate site assembly and deliver new developments on the site to drive its wider regeneration goals. The current proposal has progressed further than any other, where contracts have been exchanged and completed, meaning that subject to the planning permission being secured, there is now a greater likelihood than ever of redevelopment of the site on a scale of strategic significance, and that could now take place," end quote. And therefore, if you are minded to approve the application that's before you today, we can confirm the enabling works and car park have been programmed to start on site within the next 3 months, and we'll be ready to welcome the first visitors just 18 months after that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Spuffer, for that, for those remarks and for the helpful presentation. I'm going to ask Susan if she'd like to respond to those comments, not least from the Pleasure Beach.
Thank you, Chair. The comments made by Mr. Laister, I think a lot of them have been addressed in the officer report and in the update note. We do acknowledge the similarities, sort of no material difference between a theme park and an amusement park. We don't feel that a condition stipulating that no more than 10% of the floor space could be mechanical rides is defensible. We've had no evidence to suggest that a figure of more than 10% would be unacceptable. And also, I do appreciate that Mr. Laister says that 10% is an ordinary indication of what is ancillary, but the definition of ancillary is something that is incidental to and subordinate to. And the inspectorate have found that levels up to 20 and 30% of floor space can still be considered ancillary. So we have that issue. And also, of course, as Mr. Laister pointed out, the description of development is as a theme park. And so it would be unreasonable for the council to impose conditions that then prevented that use from being implemented. In terms of the description of development, that was perhaps misleading wording on my part. We wouldn't have to go back to the beginning. It would be a case of changing the description of development, updating the environmental statement, going out for consultation again. The consultation period on an environmental statement is 30 days, and obviously there would be work involved in putting all of this together. So you would be looking at a significant delay of a good number of weeks, which is why that option hasn't been explored. In terms of Mr. Spaulding's comments, I don't think there's anything I can add to that. It's, yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much indeed for those contributions. It's now a matter for colleagues as members of the Planning Committee to give their views. The recommendation is, of course, that this outline application be approved. There's an awful lot of work that's got to be done, even if we give approval today. This is just the skeleton. This is giving a permission in principle for the development as outlined. And the conditions are there to make sure the applicant, the developer, delivers what the council expects the developer to deliver. And they're also there to make sure that the impact on the local, the local street scene and people using those facilities is kept to a minimum. With an application of this kind, one would expect a great number of conditions. You've heard the developer's representative accept those conditions in full, and I think that's a good start. Over to you, colleagues. Anybody wish to speak? Does anybody wish to move that we approve the application? Yes, come in, please. Councillor Robertson.
I'd just like to ask the developer a question. He says it's going to be operational 364 days a year. On the 65th day, which I suppose is going to be Christmas Day, is the car park going to be open for that day as well?
Phone on? Can you? Hopefully you can hear me. Obviously, Nick will not be operating the car park on a day-to-day basis, but I can see absolutely no reason why it shouldn't be left open. There's no purely left out the 365th day of the year simply because it was Christmas Day. So if there is a demand on Christmas Day for for things to be open on that Christmas Day, then we can change it to 365 days a year.
The car park will be operated by the council, so we'll be able to control that, I would have thought, better than Nicole.
Thank you very much, Chair. Firstly, I'd like to congratulate the officers and the team for putting this together. It must have been an absolute nightmare with everything that's gone on. But I do have this concern that's come forward with the Pleasure Beach's other concern, well, main concern, with this mechanical ride percentage. Now, from what I've just heard from the developer, their proposals are to have very little mechanical rides in there, because we're talking about concert areas and different things going on. Now, if they're quite happy to be restricted as far as the mechanical ride area is concerned, can we put that condition in place that they have, I don't know, less than 50%? I mean, it gives them quite a good scope if they do want mechanical rides in there, but it means that only 50% of the site is going to be mechanical rides, which I think is a fair decision, or a fair option for them to go down, and it does safeguard the Pleasure Beach in its current state. Thank you.
Do you not think the Pleasure Beach is bigger than this small development, and it has very little to fear from the rides on the piers? And I don't know. I mean, people in Blackpool, if they come here, they migrate, do they not, from one attraction to another. And I don't think there's any evidence that Blackpool has ceased to be a prime centre of entertainment, even when we've lost so many theatres and cinemas. Everything changes over time. People find new forms of entertainment, and of course we've got to accommodate those wishes. I honestly think the Pleasure Beach will always be the major attraction in Blackpool. It has been since the year it started, and it's always replenished itself. It's always had its ear for the public feel. And I honestly don't think that this will be any significant competition. There will, yes, it may be on some cold, wet days in winter, before the Pleasure Beach has even opened, this attraction will be there. But surely the council wants to attract people to the town at all times of the year, and that there will be venues open for their entertainment. So I think we've got to have a little bit of a perspective about it.
Can I just come back on that? Can I come back on that, Chair? Yeah, I quite agree with you, and I'm not just sure, excuse me, of the square footage of the central car park site in relation to the Pleasure Beach site. I'm sure the Pleasure Beach site is vastly bigger than the site we are talking about here. And yes, I do agree that I don't think they've had much to fear of Blackpool Central taking over Blackpool Pleasure Beach. I think it's pretty well established, and I think it will be pretty well established at the end of all this. So yes, I quite agree with you. I was just thinking of something that possibly could appease the Pleasure Beach in its objection, just to make them a little more comfortable that it's not going to become Blackpool Pleasure Beach Central. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, Councillor Farrell, I think.
Thank you, Chair. It's obviously a really exciting development for Blackpool, but I'm concerned that it's going to take 10 years for this development to be fully completed. Is there any opportunity or flexibility for it to be completed sooner? Thank you, Chair.
I think the biggest imponderable is the Her Majesty's Court and Tribunal Service. Members will be aware, I think, that the Council has been negotiating now for, I think, 3 years with them to assist us in finding another site. We think we've identified one, of course, but it's going to be a massive civil engineering job to shift or to demolish what is there and build a new. And of course, that is one of the inhibiting factors in this development. And that is why I suppose it has to be phased. I think the developers and ourselves would very much like to see a truncated time scale, but in giving the figures that we have before us, the time lapse, I think there's a bit of built-in, what shall I say, accommodation there, and I think everybody concerned would like it to be a lot sooner, but I think that is the major concern in marshalling the site, is a position of the law courts and the old police station. I know Susan wants to come in.
Thank you, Chair. Only before I forget what I want to say. Just in response to Councillor Farrell's comments, the one thing I could say that perhaps might offer a bit of reassurance as well, from discussions with the applicant, the timescales suggested are very much to give wiggle room in case the unexpected happens. I don't think they are wanting to take that long. I think they're wanting to get the development delivered faster. But obviously, if we put a condition on that stipulates different times and they, for whatever reason, can't meet those, you're then having to come in with more applications to vary the conditions. So I think it's just building in that flexibility. Just on the points that Councillor Stansfield raised, all I can say is that this has been a subject of significant discussion. One of the issues is obviously the percentage that we put on a condition like that. Mr Laister suggested 10%, you've suggested 50%. We don't actually have any evidence to dictate a percentage for us, and we can't have a condition that isn't backed up by some kind of evidence that says this would cause a problem, this level wouldn't cause a problem. But the other issue that we do have is that nothing in our policy beyond CS20 would give us a foundation to defend a condition like that if we imposed one. So let's say, for example, we put on a condition that stipulated a percentage. If the developer then wanted to challenge that in the future and change the development, what would we be falling back on in terms of the development plan to defend that application? We'd be back to looking at CS20, so we'd actually be back in the same position that we're in now. And yeah, that's I think that's basically where we've come down on the condition side of things. Thank you, Chair.
Anybody else? Well, I'm going to move, and it's a pleasure to be able to move that we accept the recommendation to approve this development. And I think we can look forward to it as a major part of Blackpool's tourism offer. And I think for a small number of the members of the council here tonight, I think it's an honour to be involved in such a major decision. I move. Is it seconded? Well, I've got 3 hands went up straight away, so I think the Vice Chairman. So I'm going to put it to the vote. Those in favour of... Sorry. Yeah, this is the outline application, of course. It's in, as we know, we've got the list, we've got the heritage properties, which are there for full permission, and the... Is it not?
Sorry, no. The first vote has to be on the adoption of the heritage habitats regulations assessment.
Right, okay.
Any decision on the planning.
It's a good job we've got an expert here. Do we agree that, whatever it is? Yes, all right, yeah. Unanimously, yes. So now we've got the full application. Bear in mind we've got a listed building consent application to follow, but it's a hybrid. We're giving full permission to the heritage offer. Those are the buildings on the south-eastern corner of the site, and we're giving outline permission for the major development. They'll obviously be coming back to us at some stage with full details.
And full the car park as well. Just to
And approve the car park.
The car park and the heritage court are in full. Phases 1 and 3 are now.
Yeah, the car park is the saddest part of it, I think. I mean, that's going to be the major draw. They'll see Blackpool Tower and they'll see this car park. I just hope that the applicant can give us something that's striking. I think we all heard what he was saying about being adaptable and the electrics and charging points and all the rest of it. Plug-in power points at the moment, but it might go to this air, is it, when you can sort of drive over a pad and your car charges up without you plugging anything in. But there's got to be all kinds of flexibility, but I just hope that it looks decent, because a car park can be the most boring and ugly of buildings. I hope this is an exception. Do we know what we're voting for, please? Those in favour, please show. That is a unanimous decision. We can now turn to the listed building application, the consent for the cinema building particularly. Do you want to speak, Susan?
PowerPoint number 2? No, I'm joking. So that we don't have a PowerPoint for this, and it's a far shorter presentation. This application is no less important, of course, but far less complex. It is for listed building consent for the works to the former picture house, and it enables us to consider all the things that wouldn't normally be looked at under a planning application, such as internal works and internal alterations and works that otherwise don't classify as development requiring planning permission. The application is for the demolition of the existing single-storey rear extension and its replacement by a 2-storey rear extension, the removal of the attached single-storey retail unit to the side and its replacement with a glazed canopy. The windows, stonework and brickwork would be repaired where possible and replaced where not. The roof would be repaired and 6 roof lights installed. New entrance doors would be provided to the frontage. The substation to the rear would receive a new door and alterations to the brickwork. New rainwater goods would be installed, and the scheme would provide internal alterations, including the partial removal of the non-original first floor structure to create an open atrium revealing the original ceiling. The building, as altered, would be used for the sale and consumption of food and drink in the form of an artisan market or food hall. The building dates back to 1913 and was listed as Grade 2 in 1983, and I'm sure members will be familiar with it. Historic England, the Theatres Trust, the Cinemas Trust, Lancashire County Council Archaeology Service, the Civic Trust and Blackpool's Built Heritage Manager have all considered the proposals. 2 representations have been received in relation to this application, and these are detailed in the officer report. It is recognised that the building has been subject to a number of unsympathetic alterations over the years, and that these have been damaging to its character and significance. The building has also deteriorated, the roof leaks and this has caused ceiling damage, there is some evidence of slight structural movement and the basement is susceptible to flooding. The application has been considered with due regard to the Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act and the MPPF. The benefits of bringing the building back into active use and thereby safeguarding its future are well recognised, and the proposal is welcomed. Given the history of the wider area and the building, the proposed use is considered to be appropriate. The heritage statement submitted with the application is also appropriate in scope and content, and the overall approach to retain and repair as many original features as possible is very much supported. The internal works, including the partial removal of the concrete floor, would reverse some of the damaging interventions of the 1980s and enable the full height of the building to be appreciated once again, and thereby this would restore a significant historic feature. 6 skylights are proposed in the roof. The size and position of these have been amended since first submission in response to officer concerns, and the benefits that would arise from natural light into the internal space are considered sufficient to outweigh the harm to the fabric of the original building. Again, the officer report fails to note that the council would benefit financially from the sale of this building. I can apologise for that, but again, this is not a material planning consideration to which weight should be afforded. Overall, the building has been vacant for several years and is semi-derelict. Most original features internally have been removed or severely compromised. Bringing the building back into beneficial use, restoring lost features and repairing those that remain will significantly enhance the character and significance of the building as a heritage asset. Subject to the conditions recommended, the works would result in less than substantial harm, and the harm that would arise would be clearly outweighed by the benefits of the scheme. And as such, members are respectfully recommended to grant listed building consent subject to the conditions listed in the office report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Susan. That's a recommendation for approval with the 6 conditions. I think at this point it might be fair to pay tribute to Jan Cresswell, who beavers around the scene. I don't think members know too much about Jan, but she was very much involved with the local listed building programme over several years, and she's very switched on when it comes to appreciating the purpose and the value of buildings like this. And I think so much in that report, it's in her language, I think. So she's not here, but I'm sure that Susan will pass on our thanks for that very interesting piece anyway, about the history of the building and the decision or the applicant wishes to enhance its appearance and indeed preserve it for the future. There it is, colleagues. Was anybody going to move approval?
Chair, I believe Mrs Borforth did register to speak on this item as well.
Sorry? Yeah. Oh, sorry, he wants to speak. I beg your pardon. Sorry, I'm stealing your thunder. Go ahead. Yes. Mr.
I shan't keep you for more than a few seconds, so just 1 minute from me. Our priority here has clearly been to ensure that any changes to the listed building are not so significant that they detract from the original purpose of the building. We see the Grade 2 listed picture house as an important heritage asset for the town, and we believe it deserves to be fully integrated into the wider scheme. We therefore wanted to avoid simply retaining the facade onto Central Drive and then removing everything behind it. We wanted to avoid doing that. It's fair to say that for the reasons that have just been outlined, the building has not been without its challenges, but we believe that the proposed new use, the restoration of the original vaulted ceiling and its wonderful decorative ribs, the demolition of the much later rear extension, and the creation of this more modern and appealing replacement to the rear, the introduction of new natural light into the former auditorium will make this a really appealing place to visit as part of anybody's trip or holiday to Blackpool. We also, for many people parking at Blackpool Central, this building may be the very first or last facility that they see. And the focus has therefore been on the creation of a really high quality experience and environment for residents and businesses alike. We believe that the solution that we've arrived at has brought together the best of the building's architecture and historic features with the needs and the expectations of the town's 21st century visitors and consumers. And we hope you can support the changes that we are proposing to make so that we can work together to preserve these buildings for future generations to enjoy. Thank you.
Councillor Stansfield.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think between you and myself, we've seen many of these applications come in over the years where we've lost a lot of our iconic buildings. And I'm so pleased that this one isn't going to be lost, that it's going to be restored to what it was and become a focal point of this development. And I will be very honoured to, in this particular case, to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation on this application.
Thank you very much indeed. It's moved by Councillor Stansfield. Councillor Baker, hand went up first. Indeed. Does anybody wish to speak on it? No? I'll put it to the vote. Those in favour, please show. Again, it's unanimous, I think. There's a tide in the affairs of men, which taken at the flood leads on to fortune. Omitted, all the voyage of their life is bound in shallows and in miseries. On such a full sea are we now afloat, and we must take the current when it serves, or lose our ventures. I think what Brutus said to Cassius quite momentous, almost fits the bill here. Of course, Philippi came in the way, big roadblock to their ambitions. We've got full planning permission for the future to consider. We hope this particular venture has a great success, that we can get a truncated timescale, and that we have another major tourism attraction here in the middle of Blackpool for the delight of our visitors and indeed our own residents. We hope for greater things. Thank you so much, everybody, for your attendance tonight. But before we go, just to thank Susan for her great efforts on your behalf. I don't know whether she likes lilies, but she's got a bit of everything. She deserves a lot more than that. Believe you me, this has been a major piece of work. And Susan hasn't been in post all that long length of time as our Chief Planning Officer. I think all the little things she's done so far have been the great lead-up to the swelling act. And I think this has been a real magnum opus, and I'm sure we're all grateful. She'll be heartily relieved to have got to this stage. She'll be drawing breath before the full application comes in. We hope it won't be too long off, but I hope by that stage she's recovered her breath and she's ready for the fray once again. Thank you so much, everybody. You'll note the time and date of our next meeting. I'll adjourn this particular session. Thank you very much.